And welcome back to the Late for Load In podcast. I'm Chris. I'm here with my co-host Josh. And on this week's episode, we have Mickey Shapiro, entertainment attorney, former artist manager, and all-around music industry mogul. And actually, something to note right at the top of this is that we recorded this a few weeks ago during the, literally right in the middle of the LA fire. So we start off the episode talking about what Mickey's experience was. Basically, luckily, he was out of harm's way from the actual, being in the direct line of the fires, but just what it was like to be in the state of California or anywhere near the West Coast during all of that chaos.
Yeah, he was right in the middle of it. A little south of it, but still, it was probably 3 days into the fires happening. So, but it was awesome that he was still able to join us, and hearing some of the stories and all of the stories that he told, it really opened our eyes to realize that he's kind of the Forrest Gump of the music industry. It seems like every single thing that he was like on the forefront of all the big important moments of music as we know it today. Hearing his journey, being one of the youngest to argue in front of the Supreme Court about music rights. I mean, being in the music industry, we'd never think anything about going into, the last thing I would think to have to want to do is to go deal with the Supreme Court in any sort of way.
No way, yeah.
It was awesome to hear these stories.
Yeah, and he just, all around advocate for musicians, producers, songwriters, all that stuff. So yeah, just somebody really in the corner of the people, kind of leading the world in the charge of arts and music and all the things of that sort. But we also get into things about the role that he played in the formation of Fleetwood Mac, which is really cool, and how he managed that band for many, many years. And he even tells us a really touching story about taking his parents to see Fleetwood Mac live for the first time at the Rose Bowl, and Mick Fleetwood coming up and introducing himself to his parents. I don't know, it's really cool. He's just a wealth of knowledge and a never-ending well of just really, really awesome music industry stories.
The Forrest Gump, man. It's like I said, every time, and then even talking about the early stages and beginning days of developing and creating MTV, and the stories about Eric Clapton and Steely Dan and just freaking endless ones.
It just never ends.
What was that? The studio down here, Muscle Shoals. Hearing all about that, and then all the impactful court cases that he's been a part of and represented. I know he did I think we talked about him representing Jerry Heller during for the movie Straight Outta Compton with the defamation case. So it's just, there's so much in here. Yeah, I mean,
you've said it a bunch of times, like the Forrest Gump of the music industry. When you said it in the episode, I didn't really click, but as we got further into the episode, I was like, holy shit, there isn't a more accurate way to just wrap Mickey all up in one thing. And that's actually a good point that we want to touch on here, is that when we were filming this episode, Mickey actually had he had a commitment he had to go to with a client for, I believe, a court case. So we had to end the episode before we really got to dig into some of the topics that we wanted to cover. So there will more than likely be a second episode with Mickey, because there's just so much more of his story that we really want to get a chance to dig into. So we're for sure going to have him back on. So I hope you enjoy part one. And I also wanted to note that this week there will be audio only. There was an issue with some of the video uploading from Mickey's side. Luckily, we still have the audio. So this week will be audio only. You can still watch the episode on YouTube. It'll be an audio only stream. And we'll be back to full video episodes next week. So on that note, let's get into this week's episode with Mickey Shapiro. This episode of Late for Load-In is brought to you by Rockabilia.com, your go-to destination for 100% official band merchandise. No bootlegs, no cheap knockoffs, just authentic gear straight from the bands you love. From metal and punk to classic rock and beyond, Rockabilia has over 500,000 items in stock. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, patches, and even rare, hard-to-find collectibles. If you're looking for something exclusive, Rockabilia drops brand new limited edition merch every month. So if you see something you like, grab it before it's gone. And in fact, we just placed an order for some new merch ourselves. I picked up a very, very cool Linkin Park Meteora hoodie. Josh, did you grab something?
Yeah, I grabbed a couple things. I got a super limited Eminem tour shirt, and then what you mentioned not missing out, I saw a Meatloaf tour shirt from 2005 that I really, really wanted. Unfortunately, I didn't have my size, so I missed out on that one.
Well, there you have it. Don't wait. Our friends at Rockabilia are hooking up Late for Load-In listeners with 10% off when you use code LOAD at checkout. So if your band tee collection needs a refresh and you want to support the artists who make the music we love, hit up rockabilia.com, load up your cart, and drop in code LOAD, LOAD, for that sweet discount. Now let's roll today's show. All right, Mickey Shapiro, welcome
Yes, sir.
to the Late for Load In podcast. Thanks for giving us a little bit of your time and chatting with us today.
It's my pleasure to wake up early in the morning when the city's burning down to do this podcast. It's very exciting.
Oh, God.
Well, speaking of, let's go into that real quick. How are you handling and adapting to everything going on out there right now?
It's, if you're in an earthquake, you have the earthquake and it's over. You have a typhoon, it hits your city and it's over. The thing about this, which is maddening, is that every time you go to bed at night, if the winds kick up, the embers from fire A could go 2 or 3 miles down the road and you got another fire. I feel really so bad for the firefighters because, frankly, they're losing the battle.
Right.
And of course, whatever your politics are, that it's irrelevant. But the amount of human suffering, I'll just make one comment, then we'll go back to rock and roll. But I have a photograph from Vietnam of what it looked like when we carpet bombed Vietnam. And I can tell you, Pacific Palisades looks exactly like Vietnam in 1968, before you guys were born.
Watching it from this side of the country, like obviously it's going to be infinitely worse when you're living in the middle of it. But even watching it from the opposite coast, it's like watching a scene out of a horror movie. Like it doesn't feel real. And like it's like brings immense sadness watching. I've got tons of friends, and friends with family out there, and it's just like watching it is just completely heartbreaking.
So on to some more positive stuff. The music business, rock and roll, and all the fun I've had in it. And it's by the way, gentlemen, it's my pleasure to share that with you. I hope you find it interesting and humorous and entertaining. If it isn't, just stop the podcast and say, get out.
Yeah, we'll kick you off. We'll kick him off. Hey, what year were you born?
1641. No,
I was going to say.
I was born in 1940. I'm so old that I went to law school with Abraham Lincoln. That's how.
What was it like surviving the Civil War?
I said to Abraham Lincoln, you freed the what? No, it's not true. It's not true. I was born in 1940 in Los Angeles. My father was an all-American athlete. My mom was from London, England. And as a little boy, it's relevant in the sense that I saw the British invasion from both the British side and the American side, because I, as a little boy, had the horrors of having to go visit my family in England. I hated it, but I did see the early things with Johnny Nero, the Blues Breakers, and I saw the beginning of all of the British invasion. The 60s were a horrible time in the sense that we had the Vietnam War, we had the assassination of Kennedy and King, civil rights movement, but we also had a thing called the Beatles. So it was sort of being young at that time. When I grew up, everyone was in the 50s, 1950s, not 1850s. It was all about Elvis Presley and the Everly Brothers. So the British invasion, in the midst of all this turmoil of the 60s, people complain now that this is a tumultuous time, which it is. But think about this: 3 assassinations, a war, and a civil rights movement, all going on at the same time.
Yeah, I'm certainly not getting into politics at all, but living through the time that we're living through now and being a dad and having 2 kids, and I worry about the state of the world that we're living in now, right? And I often sit here and wonder, like, are we living through the worst time period ever, or are we just more aware of all of the things going on in the world because of social media and the internet?
I was gonna say.
And in reality, a lot of the stuff has been going on forever, and the information just traveled much slower. Like that's like a pretty daily routine of thought that I go through, to be honest.
I think you're right. I mean, just to, again, we'll get back to music, but just one snapshot. I think when the world saw a bunch of police officers beating up Rodney King, and that image was flashed around the world, it did have an enormous impact. Now, do I think pre-internet things did travel? But the fact that momentarily images are shared and opinions are thought, the internet's both a blessing and a curse, okay? Because, of course, you're right. You're a father. I'm a father. I'm also a grandfather. But I'm just saying, you wonder about, is the chaos that I'm feeling going to affect the lives of my children? Is it going to make them cynical? Is it going to make them negative? Is it going to affect them psychologically and emotionally? Those are all very, very real things. And I think one of the blessings to being involved in music, it's a pause. It's a moment where the joy of what you hear and what you feel, either through the lyrics, or first time you hear Jimmy Page play, or the first time you hear oh, this guy plays the guitar upside down and backwards? That's weird. What's his name? Jimi Hendrix. Well, that's pretty weird. And then, but when you hear that and you go, oh my God, all on the Watchtower played like that. Wow, I'm relieved from that image. And I think we're all lucky, very, very lucky to be around very.
We lost him.
Oh boy. Very. Let me call him.
We should be good now.
Okay, right. Chris, can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yeah, we got you.
We're good
but
now.
What you were saying. So a question that we asked on a previous episode is the impact of these musicians and these records and music today the same as it was back then? Because everybody is so accessible these days. So it's almost like the Jimi Hendrix of today, in my opinion at least, almost doesn't exist because that mystique is gone.
Well, I think there's two sides of that. I think it's once again grappling with the impact of technology upon the brain and the emotion and in the whole area of communication. What we saw with Taylor Swift, for instance, she's the icon of the world right now.
Sure.
That's something where that level impact is something that was not possible in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Sure.
Okay. However, I'll just give you a for instance that kind of cuts through all of the technology. It was 1968, before you guys were born. I went to a little club in Los Angeles called the Whiskey A Go-Go. And there were two new acts. It was a Tuesday night where one act was a group called The Doors, and the other was an act called the Buffalo Springfield. In the middle of all this chaos, I heard a song called For What It's Worth by Stephen Stills, which really monitored what was going on socially. The fact that I can remember that song without the technology, without the internet, the fact that I was so impacted by a song which talked about the horrors of the Vietnam War. My point being, of course, technology is accelerated, but I believe you and I, Chris and I, we could go to a club and a guy could pick up a guitar and play a great song and we go, shit, that's great. And I think that's the moment. It's the impact of creativity upon the psyche. And I think as you guys are young, but during the Vietnam War or whatever, or right now, the fires in LA, whatever is going on, the hurricane hits the Gulf Coast of Florida, whatever that might be, music or being around people who can make it and penetrate our souls in a very serious way without getting too artsy craftsy. But I'm just saying there's some magic in that. And I think all of us involved in this business are really lucky to have, if you will, a relief hatch from the day to day.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to, because you said you were born in LA, is that right?
Yes, sir.
What was it like growing up in LA? Like, what was life like in LA back then? And did that in any way influence your career path that you ended up heading down?
Well, the thing was, my mother and father and older sister, who's now at 93 still teaching, were all musicians. Okay. So music was always around the house. And then I was forced to take violin lessons, which I hated. But so the impact was mom and dad would sit at the piano and play. My sister would play. And I got stuck with a violin. And, you don't meet a lot of good-looking women playing a violin. The basketball was a better entree to my social life. So I gave up the violin. But I have to say, the fact that I actually could read music and the fact that I could know what a coda was, and I knew what keys were, I knew what modulation was, I knew the fact that, although I resented it because it wasn't in any way cool, it impacted me a lot. I mean, my mom and dad would sit at the piano and play. We always had a piano.
Who were your idols growing up?
In the early days, I mean, you had Elvis Presley, right? You had the kind of country music stuff. Everly Brothers was unbelievable. Then we had, on the black side of it, we had Chubby Checkers, Let's Do the Twist, and Fats Domino. So those were sort of what were going on. That's the music we heard. And then we heard this guy called Bobby Vinton. Oh God, that's so bullshit. It's horrible. But radio was different in those days. Remember, there was no MTV. It was just radio. And radio, there was a country station, and there was an R&B station, and there was a pop station. You never, ever, ever heard a white artist on an R&B station, and you never heard a black artist on a pop station. In that sense, we learned very early on there was even a class system or a caste system within music. But what those guys didn't know is a lot of white people listen to black radio, and a lot of black people listen to pop radio. So even though the technology wasn't there, the basic impact of music on one's life was very, very relevant. I mean, every high school did a musical of some kind. There was always a orchestra in the high school, and there's some guys that had a band, and guys were trying to sing. I wasn't from the East, but apparently in Philadelphia, guys would get together on the street corners and sing, groups like the Delphonics, and that's way before your time. But I'm just saying, groups of guys getting together and singing in Philadelphia, for why Philadelphia, I don't know, was very, very common. So in California, where we had a lot of the Latin influence, guys like Richie La Bamba, we heard that, when we were growing up. And, so we had a lot of influence of Latin music. But I think the story really is, and without over intellectualizing it, because music is not intellectual, it's emotional. It really became a way to escape, a way to just enjoy that moment and not worry about being caught out for doing this or doing that, or you wouldn't know this, but when I was 5 years old, I understand that Uncle Max was coming back from the war. And I didn't, World War II. I met Uncle Max. It turned out he was a Silver Star winner, and he was a hero, and he became like Uncle Max. He's the coolest guy in the world because he was a soldier and he survived the Bataan Death March. So all that kind of stuff is all mixed up together. But the photograph we take today is the same. A lot of turmoil and a lot of anxiety. We worry about our kids. What are they going to be optimistic? Are they going to be depressed? Without being overly simplistic, keep a lot of music around them. It'll get them through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing about music is it's the language that like literally anybody anywhere in the world can understand and relate to. You can have a bunch of people in the room that all speak different languages, but you play music and everyone's going to be able to relate to that one thing. It's the one unifying thing we all have.
Sure.
So I guess at what point did law come into the picture for you? Like at what point did you realize that you wanted to start pursuing that avenue?
I think I became aware that, generally speaking, I heard a lot of horror stories, let's say when I was in my teens, about the abuse that some of the artists were going under by record companies. I just felt that, I'm not talented. I can't play it, but it just seems out, if I could win the confidence of these people and help them enjoy the benefits of their creativity, that would be something I'd really like to do. So that was really the motivation. You kind of felt like you're on the front lines, you're with these musicians, you're with these composers, you're with these producers, and they're doing something great and they're not being fairly treated. Could I jump in there and maybe do something? That's basically it.
Sure.
It's like a protective thing almost, it seems.
There was a guy who I went to law school with. He's an amazing piano player. I mean, he could be, I don't know if you're into Chick Corea, but an amazing jazz piano player. And his parents told him, do not pursue music. He became a judge. And to this day, he's still alive. He sneaks off and has a little group and plays. And I always felt that was so shitty of the parents to do that to him, because what he loved, he was denied. And he was told it was a bad thing. Why? Because his father played in the big bands and always was ripped off, and they were always very, very poor. So they equated music with failure as opposed to something to be celebrated. And I always think about that guy. His name isn't important, but he's still on the bench here in California.
That's crazy.
To this day, he and I went to Europe together from undergraduate school. We hung around Europe for a few months, and he was tortured by the fact that his parents said you have to go to law school, and he wanted to just play piano.
So you went to USC, served as a student body president. What did that mean to you?
It meant that I went to undergraduate at UCLA, but USC had a thing called the Entertainment Law Institute. And back in those days, the very few law schools taught any courses in entertainment law. So I figured, I've got to go there. And the fact that I came from a middle-class family with not a great deal of finances, And it was I was on their scholarship. And the fact that I was there with all these very, very wealthy people from rather fine families, USC's kind of like a very prestigious place. And it also had a great music tradition. And the fact that my classmates, felt that I could lead them in an interesting way. I felt very lucky to win the confidence. And some of those guys are still my friends now, years later.
And I guess you carried that confidence
beg your pardon?
law. You carried that confidence into law when you won the confidence of your clients, I guess.
Yeah. I think that if it could be it could be Fleetwood Mac or Eric Clapton, whatever. I think those guys know. In Chick Corea in the jazz field, or Stanley Clarke or Al Di Meola, all these amazingly gifted people, Steely Dan, these are really gifted people. The fact that they entrusted me to guide them, I thought was a very high compliment. And I felt, I'm a lucky guy. I mean, yeah, I'm a smart guy. There's a lot of smart guys. But the fact that Brian Wilson's daughter, Carney Wilson, and Wilson Phillips came to me and said, would you manage us? I said, Jesus Christ, your father's Brian Wilson, for Christ's sake. What do you need me in my life? And then I met Brian Wilson. I did a couple projects with him. And the fact that I could go to Brian Wilson's house and have him sit at the piano and play Good Vibrations were the high points in my life.
So the music industry as a whole can feel impossible to navigate, right? Especially when you're getting started. You don't know where to start, who to talk to, who you can go to for help. And I would have to imagine that the side of it that is entertainment law can be just as chaotic and confusing as well. Did you have any mentors that you looked to when you were getting started that helped you kind of get in on the right path, or did you kind of just have to figure it out on your own?
Well, after I got out of law school, I clerked on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, a very prestigious thing. So this law firm hired me, and I'd have, guys come to my office with guitars and smoking marijuana, and they said, listen, we're going to put you in a different part of the building. And your clients would come in after 7 o'clock at night, but we got to wear a coat and tie downstairs. So I lived this kind of dual life. But some of those people who came was a group called the Mamas and the Papas. I don't know if you know what that is.
Oh, yeah.
A famous song called Monday, Monday. And Mama Cass Elliot would come to my office and smoke a joint, and John Phillips would sit there and play Monday Morning. That sounds like a hit to me. And so from the
Did
very
you smoke
beginning,
a joint with them?
From the very beginning, I tried to somehow be a lawyer, with all that, go to court, which I can do with a lot of success. But the joy of it was really a guy coming in with a guitar or piano and just blowing my mind out. And by the way, I feel the same way today.
I noticed that you purposely ignored my question. Did you smoke a joint with them?
Absolutely.
Good man.
But I got to tell you something, just as a sidebar. What we were smoking in the 60s is nothing like the stuff that's out there now.
Sure.
That's true.
Did your family support this career path?
Well, my mother used to say, but are you still a lawyer?
Sure.
My father thought it was great. My father
That's
father
awesome.
was, I think my mother was always concerned that, I had this kind of rebellious streak in me that might take it over and I'll end up doing something stupid and embarrass the family. But my father said he's a smart kid. Let him go do what he wants to do. And I have to say, just so you'll understand this as a father, and you'll understand this as a father, Josh. One of the moments in my life which was enormously impactful was Fleetwood Mac was playing a concert at the Hollywood Bowl. My parents had never gone to a Fleetwood Mac concert. And if you ever gone to a Fleetwood Mac concert, Mick, he's all got makeup and he's got the... And he came off the stage after the concert and came over to my parents who were seated. He took my mother by the hand and she said, Mrs. Shapiro, I would love to introduce you to my bandmates. I think in terms of a moment which was emotionally important and still is, that was something that very dear to my heart.
That's awesome. I can imagine that being it's almost like a look, mom, look, dad, I'm doing something that's real and important here, and that's, I don't know. I can imagine that being a thing that really sticks out in your memory for really the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Tell us about arguing in front of the Supreme Court. You were one of the youngest attorneys to do so. What was that like?
Let me tell you all about that. There's a thing called amicus curiae, which means friend of the court. Now, what I observed was the following. Because there was a lot of talk about managers ripping off artists in the court about Colonel with Elvis, and he had a 50-50 deal. So his commission was 50%. And there was a huge groundswell believing that managers were evil people who were ripping off artists.
Yeah, Josh.
And what happened was they passed a law in California that said only a licensed artist manager can book a group. Okay? Well, we all know if you've got a new group, no major agency is going to take them on. So the manager has to do the booking. Well, the law was so horrible, it said, not only is the contract void, the manager has to pay back all the commissions to the group. And I was seeing struggling young managers violating the law because they had to, because they got to get work for their clients, right? Got to get work. I mean, can you imagine William Morris taking on a bar band that's got no records out? This is the only way that group could survive. The manager go and hustle and get a job for them, and that was illegal. So there was a guy called Matthew Cates. He represented a group called the Jefferson Airplane, and he was sued. And I filed a brief called an amicus curiae brief. I was 29 years old at the time. I went to the United States Supreme Court and said basically what I said right here, that the law at this point was unfair because a manager of a group, his job is to manage his group, which means to acquire employment for them, and agencies won't take them. And if it wasn't for this guy, these guys would be nowhere. And by the way, on top of that, he's got to pay back all the commissions that he paid his rent and his light bill on. No, that can't be right. That was my first experience in the Supreme Court.
That's crazy.
Were you nervous going up against them like that? Because that's a prestigious place. Where you, I
don't think nervous. Was I awestruck by being there? Of course I was, and being as young as I was. But I really felt that what I had to say had some value.
Yeah, and, you believed in what you were fighting for.
Yeah, I mean, I think once again, all of us who are in whatever part of this business, we know how lucky we are to be associated with this creative process. And people who contribute to it should be protected as any way possible. And I think that law in California was so unrealistic. By the way, the court used my brief in writing its opinion, so I felt pretty good about that.
So let me ask you this question. Who's this other Mickey Shapiro that went to USC? Can we sue him for pretending to be you or what?
Yeah, he's actually a guy from Michigan.
This is just bullshit to me.
He's actually a very nice man. He's a Holocaust survivor, actually. And he, by pure coincidence, he made a multi-million contribution to USC, to the Shoah Foundation, which is a foundation which takes stories of Holocaust survivors. So although we've never met on the phone, we've talked on the phone, it's just a pure coincidence. And he's a very nice man. And he said, yeah, people call me all the time and ask me, do I know a good guitar player? I said, why are you calling me? You got one guy. So it's just pure coincidence.
So he's got money, though, is what you're saying.
He's got a lot of money, yeah.
So can we sue him for pretending to be you?
He's not pretending. He is who he is. It just happened to be that. I mean, I guess the governor of Pennsylvania, we can't sue him for using my name either, Josh Shapiro.
Who's cooler?
I beg pardon?
You or him? Who's cooler, you or him?
I think I am.
All right.
I think he's a lot richer than I am. So.
You mentioned that you're also a father. How many kids do you have?
I have two sons and a stepson, and one of them, actually, my stepson is in the other room. He was recording last night, so he crashed here last night. So lucky me, I got him here this morning, and he'll go back to where he lives in Ventura County. If it isn't burned now.
Sure.
And I have two adult sons. One lives in Philadelphia, one lives here. The older son teaches at Wharton. He's a smart kid, and the other one's a CPA. So they're both outstanding young men. So I'm very lucky and blessed to have them.
They are following in their dad's footsteps of excellence, and you even got some musical stuff going out throughout the family too. That's awesome. That's really cool.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because as little boys, when we were all before the divorce, they were living together, and some guys would come over and sit at the piano and play songs. And, I remember the group Ace that had a song, How Long Has This Been Going On? That was composed in my living room with my kids sitting here. Is that when it became a hit there, they felt they had something to do with it.
Sure. That's crazy. Maybe you can relate to this, and you're probably a good person to ask about this, right? With my two kids, I've decided that I'm not going to push music onto them. If they want to pursue music or they show any interest in it, like I'll definitely do everything within my power to foster that.
Sure.
But I'm not gonna like force it on them. All I'm doing is just exposing it to them in the environments they're in. Is that kind of the same way you handled it, or did you ever have hopes and dreams that your kids would kind of go into the entertainment industry like you did?
No, I felt that they were also gifted athletically, so
Okay.
they had a lot of options involved. But the fact of the matter is, they know. I mean, they went to the recording studio when they're making Rumors. Okay, they were little kids and they saw all that, and they saw, they met Eric Clapton, and they didn't know who these people were. But
Sure.
I think that as they became later in life, they went, my God, those people are really important. But they're just kids meeting your dad's friends, and they knew their dad was happy, and they knew his dad was having fun with these people. And I think having fun is probably the thing that we need to connect with our children first and foremost.
Absolutely.
Because it's from all kinds of reasons, but without getting serious, for mental health reasons, I think we need to see our connectivity as a point of joy and laughter and smiles, if at all possible. And maybe
I couldn't agree with that more.
I mean, I just think that that's what being a parent is all about. I mean, Stone, my stepson, he's sleeping in the other room. The fact he just came by last night and crashed here really made me happy. He came in at 3 a.m, and crashed, and he's still sleeping. But how cool for me that I can have a cup of coffee with him before I go off and do my day.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Did when you served in Vietnam, did you enlist or were you drafted?
No, what happened was there was a thing called land grant colleges. If you went to what are called land grant colleges, there was mandatory ROTC. So that's how I got through it. I went through the ROTC program
In college?
Yeah, undergraduate, right? And then you come out as a second lieutenant. But since I went to law school, they deferred for a couple of years. I didn't have to go into immediately. So.
Would you have enlisted had you not had to do the mandatory ROTC, or no?
I really can't answer that honestly.
Sure.
Well, I have to, I have the benefit of history looking back and realizing that Vietnam was a tragedy.
Of
But at
course.
the time, you did what, your parents went to war. Turned out later, without getting into politics, that the Gulf of Tonkin never really happened. There was never an attack by a U.S. ship off the North Vietnamese coast. It was all fabrication. And that was the justification for, we're going back now, if you recall this, was actually John F. Kennedy that first put troops into Vietnam. So by the benefit of hindsight, I probably would have said it's probably a bad idea, but at the time, I probably felt that's what you're supposed to do. You're going to just do it,
Yeah, I mean, I would have to imagine that's the reason that anybody back then enlisted. You can only go off of the information that you're being told, So, yeah. I mean, it is what it is.
And like we talked about, how slow information traveled, you only got what you were given. It wasn't like there were different opinions. What was in the paper that was what was happening.
There's one newspaper, and there weren't 24-hour. Right. There's nothing like CNN.
Or Facebook.
It was just, you woke up in the morning, you get ready to go to school, you turn on the radio, and then after playing 20 songs, they give you 5 minutes of news, and that was it.
Right.
And then, one newspaper, and, it's just, as I said, the internet's both a blessing and a curse.
Right.
And I think we all make individual decisions on what we perceive to be real. And sadly, a lot of things that we see or hear are not real. They're propaganda. But we can't solve that problem. Let's talk about rock and roll.
Sure. All right, talk about rock and roll. Fleetwood Mac, how did that come about? Where did that relationship begin?
It's an interesting story. I was very interested early in my career in black music. I represented a guy called Wilson Pickett, who's called the Wicked Pickett. He had a very big, a number one song called "In the Midnight Hour." It's a great song, by the way. The reason he recorded that song in a place called Muscle Shoals, Alabama, the Muscle Shoals Sound Studio. I was actually the guy doing the finger popping on the record.
No way.
Anyway, years later, there was a club in LA in the black section of LA. Okay, not the white section. It was called Mavericks.
It's crazy
Club.
to think that back then there was segregation.
Okay, a lot of segregation. Mavericks Flat was a club in the house band, or group called the Seven Souls. There was 5 black guys, and 2 white guys. One of the white guys was a guy called Bob Welch. He then quit the group. He went to Europe. And many years later, he called me and he said, I joined this blues group called Fleetwood Mac. They want to leave England and come to America. Would you like to meet them? So on April 17th, 1971, there's a knock on my door, and there's Bob Welch, Mick Fleetwood, Christine McVie, and John McVie. And that's how it all started. Ironically, 6 months before that, I was involved in representing a singer-songwriter called Stevie Nicks and her boyfriend, Lindsey Buckingham. And I got them a record deal. And when Bob Welch decided to quit being the guitar player for Fleetwood Mac, Mick Fleetwood said, "Do you know a guitar player?" And I said, "Well, here, how about this cassette?" And that's Stevie and Lindsey. And he called me. He said, "We all went to dinner one night and they asked him to join Fleetwood Mac." I said, "You met him once at dinner at the Mexican restaurant and now they're going to be members of the band?" Yeah. That's how Fleetwood Mac got started.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
You know what's wild about all of this is you're naming all of these artists and like studios and recordings and these massive songs that I've, listened to at many points throughout my lifetime, that I've watched documentaries about, but you live this stuff. Like this is crazy hearing firsthand experiences about all of these things that I've, grown up with, knowing about, listening, watching movies about. Like you're blowing my mind right now, to be completely honest with you.
I mean, at the moment, you don't think you just think it's another moment in time. I mean, I got this cassette from Stevie and Lindsey, and I got them this record deal at Polydor Records. And, when Mick said, we want a recording studio, well, why don't you go out to that studio in the Valley and you can hear this, I didn't recommend it. I'm not going to take any credit creatively. It was just something I did. He wanted the name of the studio. I gave him the studio. He hears the Stevie and Lindsey tape. He says, "You know about these guys?" As a matter of fact, I did their deal for him at Polydor. "Oh, great. We'd like to meet him. Oh, we're going to go to a restaurant and have dinner in a place called, doesn't matter the name of the restaurant, but they go to dinner afterwards." He said, "I had dinner ago. We asked him to join the band." So you asked him to join the band? You just met him over dinner? Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned that you don't, you think these are just moments in time that are happening. And this is a question I've actually asked a couple, artists that I looked up to growing up and getting into music. I asked them if they realize in the moment when they're creating a record that goes on to be like, a landmark record for a genre or the band, like, do you know that magic is happening while you're doing it? Or is it not until hindsight that you realize that you've created like an all-time classic record? Do you think these artists are realizing that they're doing it in the moment, or they're really just, they're so in the moment that they probably don't realize it until afterwards?
I think us as observers looking at that, we don't know.
Sure.
But do I think at the core of them, they do not? I'll give you an example. The first Fleetwood Mac album with Stevie and Lindsey had Rhiannon on it and a song called "Over My Head" by Christine McVie. It sold 3 or 4 million copies. Then they started to make this record called Rumors, which it went on and no one, it was ever going to get made. And Mick Fleetwood came out. I used to talk to Mick Fleetwood every single day. He said, "Mickey, I'm going to whisper how many." I said, "The record company, we've sold 3.5 million copies of the Fleetwood Mac record. Do you think you're going to sell more?" And he whispered in my ear, he says, "We're going to sell 15 million. I said, "I don't know what the hell you're smoking, but you better change your brand." Yeah, that's insane. But he instinctively knew or believed that what was going on with those 5 people in that room in both Sausalito and in LA was of another level of connectivity of 5 enormously talented people.
Sure.
Enormously talented. And, rock and roll bands like Herding Cats, you got 25 different interests going 17 different ways.
You don't have to tell me.
Remember, Mick Fleetwood doesn't write songs. Mick Fleetwood doesn't sing. But he's, without a doubt, a visionary and has the ability to herd the cats into a room and get them to behave. And some of those, I remember my kids were like 6 or 8, went to Sausalito, and I heard for the first time "Go Your Own Way." I said, "Oh my God, that's a great song." Ironically, the record company said, "We can't release that between Christmas and New Year's." I said, "Why?" We don't do it. "No, release it." It went to #1 by January 15th around the world. So, and by the way,
unreal.
If I hear "Go Your Own Way" right now, I think it could be a hit. I think "Stairway to Heaven" will be a hit today. I think these songs, I think Jimmy Page and Robert Plant knew this was something that was beyond, Jerry Rafferty when he wrote his music, Baker Street. I think those guys just knew. Whether they really knew or it was self-delusional or ego, I don't know. But I think they knew, and they believed them to be true.
I mean, sometimes that belief, that just like blind confidence and belief in what you're doing, it is all you really need to actually make something successful. Sometimes it just happens that way.
I was going to say, you got to believe it to sell it. So, you know.
Yeah. I just think that to be around, I just mentioned a few of those records, but I mean, I remember the first time I met the guys from Steely Dan. They were so crazy creative, but they were hilarious, and they knew their music wasn't good. They knew their music was great. Whether the world would accept it as great, it was the world's problem. But they felt their music was great. And by the way, I think some of those Steely Dan records, like Reelin' in the Years, are just K19, are just brilliant. Today, I think they're still brilliant.
For sure. So I am curious, as a rock and roll attorney, how exactly did you end up in Moscow negotiating a treaty to let rock bands play in Russia? How does that happen?
Me being my big mouth, okay, my general shy nature. So here's what happened. Fleetwood Mac was this is 78. Carter was president, and I got a call from Steve Ross, who was the chairman of, was then called Warner Communication Company, then became Time Warner. But he said, Mickey, would you mind doing me a favor? Well, you're not going to say no to that guy. What's the favor? Well, the State Department wanted to know if Fleetwood Mac would invite the members of the Russian embassy to the Fleetwood Mac concert. Why not? But at that time, it was a Cold War. I mean, Russia and the United States were not getting along. And I called Mickey. He said, sure, have them come. So they come to this. Everyone's wearing rock and roll gear, and you see these guys with these old suits. You definitely know that's the Russian embassy guys. So after work, I take them backstage, and the guy was a pretty good guy. And we're talking back and forth, and me and my big mouth, I say, it'd be really cool if Fleetwood Mac could get invited to Russia to play this music in the Kremlin and broadcast it around the world and give a bunch of money to a third world country. I just said that, So then I figured no one gives a shit what I think. So
right.
Next morning, I get a phone call, and some guy says, this is Tim Kraft from the White House. I said, who the fuck is this? This is Tim Kraft. No, fuck you. No. Listen, you made a remark last night, and President Carter is interested in your remark. Would you come to the White House? I go, who the fuck is this? And an hour later, a limousine in front of the hotel. I'm sitting in fucking Jimmy Carter's office, and he said, that idea that you have is wonderful. Would you do it for me? And he then gave me the authority to go to Russia to try to negotiate some kind of a treaty that would allow Western music, which the Soviets considered to be degrading to the soul and all that kind of bullshit. We get past that. And I went there and we negotiated the deal, and that's how that happened. Just me being a smartass,
Just you being a smartass.
Yeah. Cocky, arrogant, old.
Unbelievable. Okay, so the Visitor Project with Mick Fleetwood and George Harrison, was that you being a smartass too, or what? How did that come about?
Today's show is sponsored by Bestronix Pro Audio. Let's be real. Your rig is only as solid as the cables running through it. Whether you're touring the world or building out your dream setup at home, you need quality cables that won't let you down. That's where Bestronix Pro Audio comes in. BTPA specializes in full tour rig builds, custom cabling solutions, and if you're the hands-on DIY type, they've got bulk cable and connectors so you can wire up your own setup exactly how you want it. Everything they make is road-tested, built to last, and trusted by the pros. And because you're part of the Late for Load-In crew, BTPA is giving you 10% off your order. Just use the code LFLI10 at checkout and save on the best cables in the business. So don't let bad cables kill your tone or ruin your set. Hit up btpa.com, lock in that discount, and keep your rig dialed and ready for the road. We all know that music isn't just sound, it's connection, it's healing, it's everything when you're feeling lost. That's why Late for Load-In is partnering with Heart Support, the nonprofit founded by Jay Klurs of August Burns Red to bring real, free peer support straight to you.
Are you feeling down and need someone to talk to? Just text Late for Load-In to 1-512-647-2871 and get connected with someone who understands, someone who gets how music pulls us through the hardest times. It's totally free, totally judgment-free, and 100% about supporting you through the music we love.
And if you're in a good place right now, you can be part of healing the scene. Heart Support is looking for volunteer repliers, fans like you who want to help others through the power of music. You'll be trained to support fellow fans who are struggling and join a community built on connection, mental health, and the music that keeps us going.
And again, if you need support, text Late for Load-In to the number 1-512-647-2871. If you want to be support, sign up at heartsupport.com/volunteer. Together, we're making this scene stronger.
Today's episode is brought to you by you, our incredible listeners and patrons over at patreon.com/LFLIpod. By joining, you'll get early access to episodes, exclusive monthly giveaways featuring rare memorabilia from Josh and I's time on the road, and access to our patron-only music review and reaction live streams. But that's not all. You'll also get into the Late for Load-In Road Crew Discord, where you can connect with fellow fans, submit guest requests, and drop your questions for the show. The best part? It's just $1 a month. If you love what we're doing and want to help keep the show rolling, head over to patreon.com/LFLIpod and join the road crew today. Now, back to the show.
That was something that I'm really incredibly, of all the things that I thought was how cool and interesting could be. Just to give you a little background, Mick, Mick lived in Africa as a boy growing up because his dad was in the RAF, Royal Air Force. He was a pilot, actually fought in the Battle of Britain. So a very historically interesting man. And Mick once said to me, I know my sister, who's 93 and still teaches, by the way, is a cultural anthropologist and a musicologist. So Mick said, could you ask your sister where the origins of rock and roll drumming? And she said, well, of course. So you go to a place called Kumasi. It's in Ghana. And Mick says, well, why don't we go there? So, how are we going to do that? I said, we'll just get a bunch of music. Long story short, we get a bunch of musicians. We fly to Ghana. And it is really a third world country. I mean, nothing works. Elevators don't work. Nothing. But we hook up with a guy, American guy, who was living in Kumasi, who happened to be a musician. So he invited us up there, and we put together this project called The Visitor. You can listen to it. It's on the internet.
Sure.
And then afterwards, when we've done the recording, we went up to London, and George Harrison added all the slide guitar parts. So, talking about something that was incredibly interesting to see Mick Fleetwood and a bunch of American musicians playing with. By the way, these kids at age 8 and 9 are master drummers. These, if you do some research, Kumasi is the home of the polyrhythmic drumming thing. Rock and roll basically just put 4/4 on top of it, but there's a lot going on underneath. And the wonderful thing about this project was you could see these kids, little kids, playing with the Fleetwood Mac musicians, and they were ahead of them at times. It was really wondrous, you know. Unfortunately, it's pre-internet, so the distribution RCA didn't do a particularly good job. But from a creative point of view, it was awe-inspiring, you know.
That's crazy. Speaking of bringing together a bunch of musicians for a cause, can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in We Are the World?
Okay, I talk about weird coincidence. I told you the story when Mick Fleetwood and they knocked on my door. That same week, I met a guy called Quincy Jones. On the same week, who just recently passed, by the way. So Quincy, when he did We Are the World, he said, would you help clear rights? So what I did was I donated my lawyer time to clearing the rights because Lindsey Buckingham from Fleetwood Mac was in We Are the World. And of course, there's always, 6 degrees of separation. That's how I met Dionne Warwick, who's now a good friend of mine. Just, again, being at the right time and being there with a smile and knowing how much I enjoyed the music. I mean, talk about, just a unbelievably gifted, wonderful musician, singer, and composer. I mean, she's unbelievable, Dionne Warwick. Unbelievable. That's how I got involved. Ironically, before that, George Harrison did a project called Concert for Bangladesh, and I did all the legal work for that too as a gift because I was attracted to the cause, you know.
Got it. And what exactly was like the whole concept behind the Concert for Bangladesh? I obviously everyone knows We Are the World, right? That was a huge deal, but I'm not sure I know anything about Concert for Bangladesh.
I don't either.
What was that about?
Yeah, what happened was, if you look at the map, you'll see that Bangladesh is on either side of India, right?
Right.
It's an enormously impoverished country, enormously impoverished, and people were literally starving to death. But George had friends, Bangladeshi musicians, and he said, let's get that was the first one of those kind of conference was a concert for Bangladesh. And so George knew my sister through their musicology part of the life. And my sister said, I'd volunteer to do that. So that's how that happened. So before We Are the World, there was the concert for Bangladesh. Before Farm Aid, that was the very, 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 very first moment in time that I know where a bunch of musicians, diverse musicians, donated their skills and talent for a cause that was worthy, and it was sponsored by a giant. George Harrison, amazing guy,
That's awesome. Yeah, I was completely unaware of that, but that's cool. The first time, like I said, it was even before my time, I'm pretty sure, before I was born, but everybody obviously knows We Are the World.
Yeah.
It's cool to know that there was, musicians really stepping up to help people in other parts of the world even before that as well.
I mean, these mega concerts, they're game changers, I would be surprised. I mean, I'm sure as I'm speaking, they're talking about doing some concerts for LA, for the firefighters.
Oh yeah, I would imagine so, yeah.
There's definitely some benefits going on.
I did a small concert with Brian Wilson, and it was about child abuse. It was put together with musicians. So it's now, I think, culturally understood that at times of tragedies, musicians will come together to raise money for worthy causes. And I think it's a wonderful connectivity between the music community. Hold on a second here. Between the music community and the culture. It's really wonderful. It's wonderful. The one I did was called Love Shouldn't Hurt. It was all about parents who beat their kids. And it was amazing who the diverse people that donated, well, one of which was Ann Wilson, who clearly is the greatest rock singer I've ever heard in my life. If you have anything doubt, just go listen to the tribute to Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven at the Kennedy Center. Listen to that woman sing. She is scary good. She is, I don't know if you know Ann Wilson from Heart.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
She just did a song with Disturbed not too long ago.
She's scary.
Yeah, it's really great.
So I'm just saying, from these associations, another opportunity. So I'm really, really, really lucky that I've been at the right place at the right time. And I'm not, sometimes I'm betrayed by my own enthusiasm, but I'll take the risk,
So let's go into the beginning of MTV then. How did that become a thing? And
that was okay. So in 1979, for reasons no one quite understood, I certainly didn't understand it. Suddenly, records weren't selling. I think one of the reasons, all the analysts say, is because the big AM pop stations had a very tight playlist. And they play the same songs over and over and over again, which made it almost impossible for a new artist to get exposed on radio. At that same point in time in England, they were making these promo clips, which we later called music videos. But at that time, Warner Communication had a thing called, they had owned 4 properties, one in Cleveland, one in Cincinnati, one in Oklahoma City. And it was called The Cube. And it was the beginning of two-way television. I don't know if you know what that means. You could sit do you like this show, and you hit a button. So it was the beginning of sort of connectivity. And there's a group in England called Duran Duran, and the record company in America refused to release the records because these guys wore makeup, and they thought that was definitely a bad idea. So we took that music video, we put it on the Cube system, and suddenly kids are going into the record store. Do you have Duran Duran? What the fuck? What's going on? And then it became such a groundswell that it occurred to us that, wait a minute, maybe we can put music on television, and that can be a promotional tool. And that's how it all happened. And in those early music videos they look kind of silly now, but they were fantastic. Of course, the one that I enjoyed the most, because I produced it, but the most fun was We're Not Gonna Take It with Twisted Sister. And it was number one. And that was so much fun because Dee Snider was such a hilarious person. Again, you guys know that music, or is that beyond you?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course we know that music.
I grew up with a mom who exposed me to 80s hair metal for all of my childhood. You saying you were involved in that is crazy. What haven't you been a part of? Jesus Christ.
Well, I haven't been, listen, I've had a lot of darkness in my life, but I'm blessed for the light that I have and the friendships that I have. And again, I think the biggest payoff is earning the trust of creative people who allow me to assist them, knowing that I respect what they do. And I'm going to be 85 in a month, okay? I've had a lot of sadness in my life, a lot of illness and things like that, but my connectivity to music and to the people who make it and to the fans that enjoy it is the reason I get up and work hard every day, because it puts a smile on my face. The reason I'm happy the kids sleep in the next room, I want to hear how I went in the studio last night. So I don't want to ever lose that. I don't want to lose that.
It's funny when you mentioned Go Your Own Way, because that song, the first thought that comes in my brain when I hear that song is Forrest Gump, the movie Forrest Gump. And in my opinion, you're like the Forrest Gump of the music industry.
Well, maybe. I don't know.
Forrest Gump just had his hands in everything, and you have your hands in everything.
Yeah, you're connected to tons of like really major moments and like really important things that have happened in the music industry.
Absolutely.
I mean, I laughed at that comparison to begin with, but and now the more I think about it, the more it actually does really make sense. Yeah, absolutely.
I am curious, was the industry community small and tight knit back then, or was it like broad and spread out? You know, like if you were in with Fleetwood Mac, you were in with everybody.
There was basically, you had the music business, let's say in the 70s. Okay, you had the whole Clive Davis / before Sony, it was called CBS Columbia group on one side. Then you had all the Warner's labels, which were Asylum, Elektra, Atlantic, and Warner Brothers, and those were the two giants. And it was a relatively small community of maybe a dozen or two executives that really commanded the resources of the entire industry. Of course, it's a different world today. For instance, if you would have mentioned the word streaming in 1970, I'd say, you better go see your urologist. What the hell are you talking about? I mean, the idea of streaming is just completely insane.
That means you're peeing in two directions.
Yeah, exactly. But so to answer your question, it was a very tight community, and there was a big relationship between radio and the record companies. The whole thing of payola was another reality that people faced. The use of drugs and girls to get records played was unfortunately a real issue that created a lot of controversy in Washington and a lot of negative feeling about the music industry. Of course, who's more corrupt than the politicians? But that's another whole story.
Do you remember those? Do you remember those things the record companies used to do back in the day? Well, back in the day for me is different than it is for you, obviously. But back in the day when I was a kid, there used to be this thing called Columbia House, and then there used to be BMG, I believe, and they would do like the 12 CDs for 1 penny thing.
Yeah, the record club.
How the fuck did they make... Yeah, the record clubs. Yeah, how the fuck did they make any money? Because we used to scam the shit out of them back in the day.
That was pretty cool. It was sort of like you get an option every month to pick up these records at a very reduced price. It was like, that... I don't know why it disappeared, but it did. But it was pretty cool.
Probably because people like Josh were scamming the system.
We used to sign up under our cats' names and all kinds of shit, and they would just send all these albums, and that's how we would discover music, because we would get all these free records. And then who are they going to bill? The cats? Well, good luck getting them to pay.
Well, I like that. You should definitely be a record company president.
I should. I definitely should.
Let me tell you, your tools of deception brings you to the top rank of the record.
Hey, maybe I got a new career path on the way. You never know. Listen, you mentioned Wilson Pickett earlier. Can you talk about what it was like in the early days with him?
Yeah, it was fiercely racially divided. Okay, up until Michael Jackson, I'm embarrassed to say, you never saw a black video on MTV. You never saw it. It just wasn't there. And on the radio side, it was very difficult. You had black promoters, you had white promoters. You had black radio stations, white radio stations. You had retail stores that sold primarily R&B, or they sold country, or there was very little cross-pollination, and it was disturbing. Wilson Pickett, well, if you have some time, it's a phenomenal recording. He actually recorded "Hey Jude." I sent it to Paul McCartney. I almost fell off his chair, but he's an amazing singer. And he recorded in a place called Muscle Shoals, Alabama. It's a very famous recording studio in Alabama. The Rolling Stones did Sticky Fingers there. Joe Cocker recorded there. It's a very famous studio. And I was a lawyer for Muscle Shoals. So I was down there and I saw this guy, Wilson Pickett. And they said, they need someone to click on the midnight hour. Do you know how to click? So suddenly I became his friend and I became his lawyer. But he told me what it was like to be a black musician in the 50s and 60s. Very, very rough. Very, very rough. I mean, your band couldn't stay at a hotel where you were playing. It was just really, it's a disgraceful slice of America that in some ways is still prevalent in certain areas. Thank God we're beyond it. But the black musicians had a very, very rough time.
Was there a time he tried to be released from his record contract or something?
Oh yeah, he said, "I want to get released from my record company," and this is something which I still I said, well, how are you going to get released? He said, I'll take care of it. So what he did, he went over to Atlantic Records at 1841 Broadway. And he went to the receptionist and said, I want to see Omelet. He meant to say omelet, but he said omelet. And the woman said, well, he's busy now. He says, really? I want to release. He pulled out a stick of dynamite and he had a cigarette lighter. And he said, unless I get my release, I'm going to blow up the building. So
Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that he probably did not consult with you, his legal representation, before doing this.
Or would you have approved it?
he just was amazing. But I mean, there's just so many. But I mean, here's an example. Warner's put out a record in the 80s called Christopher Cross, right? And the record started getting, remember the song Sailing? Do you know that song?
I think so.
Yeah. No, I'm not going to sing it. It's disgusting.
You should. Sing it.
Before that, a white artist called Bobby Caldwell put out a song called What You Won't Do for Love. Every black radio station in America played it, not knowing he was a white guy. So when Bobby Caldwell would go concertize, they'd go, well, what's this guy? Who's this guy? And Bobby Caldwell, I mean, there's not a black musician in the world that doesn't know What You Won't Do for Love. I don't know if you guys know the song. It's still amazing. Unfortunately, Bobby, he was a client of mine. He died a couple of years ago. But I'm just saying, they would not put a picture of him on the cover of the record because they would definitely not play the record if they knew he was white. I mean, it sounds insane, right?
Yeah,
crazy.
I can't even imagine living in a time period where that matters so much to people for some reason. It just doesn't even compute in my brain.
Well, especially a time where videos didn't exist. So if you didn't know that this person was black, how would you know?
Right.
I don't know how you would know.
Yeah. Well, you knew one thing. If it was Motown, it was black. If it was Columbia, it was white. If it was Warner's, it was white. People just automatically made that assumption. I mean, early days, some people thought the Doobie Brothers were black guys. They're not black guys. It was just an extraordinarily segregated mind and spirit. And as you pointed out, Josh, pre-video, you only knew what you knew. And our scope of knowledge was greatly reduced. I'm not so, I don't want to make a cultural statement, but I'm not so sure that we're culturally more advanced now that we have more communication. I still think there's a lot of divots in the system, but I do believe that we have seen, again, you can never underestimate the impact of what Thriller did to the music. I mean, there's certain records that come along. Carole King Tapestry, okay, that was a kind of monumental record. Obviously, Hotel California, Eagles, right? Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, right? These are Dark Side of the Moon, all these kind of classic records which your children will probably enjoy, or maybe they won't, but at least they'll know who the hell they are. And then all those are very successful and they're wonderful. And then all of a sudden this Michael Jackson thing hits and it just changed the world. Whether you're a fan or not, the first time you heard Thriller, the first time you saw those music videos with the dancing, and it was a new dimension. And I think, generally speaking, without getting too politically involved, the state of race relations in America now are better than they've been, certainly better than the 60s, 70s, and 80s, much better.
What was your work on the Endangered Global Initiative?
Okay, so there was a friend of mine who was involved. Well, you know who Diane Warren is, right? The songwriter?
Yes.
One of the greatest songwriters. So she's a very big animal rights person. And I told her that a guy wanted to do a project, sort of like We Are the World, but to build it around an original song and then have people around the world record it in their native language. And then the proceeds from that record would go to animal rescues within that country. The project, it kind of, for all kinds of unrelated reasons, didn't get completed, but it's still limping along. And I think one day it'll get done. The purpose of which is to address the issue that there are species around the planet that are going to just disappear due to God knows what. Certainly climate change is there. But again, there's so much politics involved. I can just say the reason I got involved because Diane asked me to. And I said, of course I would do that.
And what do you share a passion for that? I mean, what?
I share a passion for the following, that people who are characterized as selfish and overpaid are doing something that is not selfish and is not self-centered, ego-driven. I applaud that. And I don't care if you're a doctor, a lawyer, or you're a musician. The fact that you're going to take your time and effort to do something that benefits somebody for the pure joy of doing it, I applaud that. I mean, do I know personally much about endangered animals? No. But have I learned it's indeed a problem. Of course I have learned. And
Yeah, and you know that you don't want to see the gorilla disappear or the giraffe disappear,
no.
right?
So that's how I got involved, Josh. That's how I got involved.
Sure.
I think it's great. I'd love to see more musicians and people with means and a platform speak up for things like this. I think it's awesome, and I'll always, personally back any sort of,
Totally.
cause such as that. We live in a time where we are able to pass information around fast, right? We should be trying to do our best to use that for good instead of, all of the negativity and propaganda and all the nonsense that gets thrown at us at 1,000 miles an hour every day. So
every day, all day, every day.
All those projects usually emanate, Josh, if the Africa project, make Fleetwood desire to learn about drumming, or the project I did with Jeff Baxter, where we interviewed all the guitar players around the world, ask him the first question, why do you play guitar? The answer was, to me, girls. That was the usual answer. But one of the funniest guys was Steve Lukather, who's the guitar player for Toto, that group. So Steve Lukather, what would you do if you couldn't play guitar? He said, what would I do? Do you want fries with that order, sir?
I was gonna say, since Chris is a guitar player, if you didn't already know that, he's the guitar player of his band. Tell him about the documentary that you did, and
did you see it?
Give him no, I don't think
I haven't seen it
yet.
I would love to watch it though, because I'm a big documentary fan, especially if it's music. I'll watch it, and I will also say that watching Steve Lukather interviews is one of my favorite things to do, because not only is he an incredible guitar player, but his sense of humor and his wit and like how snappy he can be with stuff cracks me up every time. So I love his playing and his personality. So I love that you got to be a part of a project that he is also a part of.
What's interesting as a guitar player, I'll give you a little tip. Find the RCA Visitor album and listen to Peter Green's solo on Rattlesnake Shake. Do you know that song?
I don't know.
Rattlesnake Shake is about jerking off. Part of the lyric says, I have a friend, his name is Mick. He don't care if he has no chick. He does the rattlesnake shake. He strokes his blues away. It's
the rattlesnake shake.
Yeah, you got.
We gotta have to turn that into something. Reinvent
the absurdity of the idea that rattlesnake shake means jerking off, and it's all about Mick Fleetwood. The thing is, the guitar solo. This guy, you know who Peter Green is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, he wrote Black Magic Woman. Do you know that?
Yes. Yep.
Good. You're a guitar guy. Wonderful. I'm obsessed. My mother. God damn it. Why'd you take me the violin? I think I would have probably not been a good guitar player, but I'd have been so happy playing the guitar because I'm so obsessed with it,
Sure.
I mean, I want to, again, just an aside, Al Di Meola, do you know who he is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Al was at my house one day.
Crazy sentence to hear out loud.
Forrest Gump.
I had an old Martin guitar sitting there for my sister, and he goes, do you mind if I play? Oh my God. He gave me like an hour and a half concert. I mean, Al Di Meola is scary good, don't you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the greatest players of all time.
Yeah, and also a very funny guy. He was a hilarious guy.
Yeah,
also a hilarious guy. I'll give you one bit of laughter because I know we're getting late here, but I'll just share one thing. So Al Di Meola invited me to his house to have dinner. He's getting into a fight with his wife. It starts out with a "fuck you," Al, well, fuck you, and they start throwing things at each other. I don't want to see this. And she says, fuck you, Al. And she grabs his keys to his car. He had got himself a new Jaguar with this amazing sound system. What does Al do? He calls the state police and said, my car is stolen. They put his wife in jail. He goes down to the jail and he says, do you know this woman? He says, I've never seen her before in my life. He let her sit there for 5 days. That's the mother of his child.
That's crazy.
Jesus.
For some reason, I imagined you saying that he said, okay, fine, take it as long as you don't take my guitars or something to that effect. That went even crazier than I was anticipating.
He let her sit in jail for 5 days. He wouldn't recognize her as his wife, the mother of his kid. Unbelievable.
Jesus.
That's crazy.
Hey, Mickey, let's go into tell us about representing Jerry Heller in the Straight Outta Compton lawsuit. How did that come about? Did you have a previous relationship with Jerry, or?
Yeah, here's what happened. There was an artist, Terrence Trent D'Arby. Do you remember that guy? He was on Motown.
No.
He had a hit, but long story short, he was signed to a little small label. And the guy that ran that label said, I've got this guy, and we have this artist, and he's got a manager called Jerry Heller. And I was originally hired to break the contract between Heller and this artist. But I did such a good job that when Heller got in trouble with Dr. Dre, he hired me, and that's how that all got started. It's, once again, an old relationship from basically founded upon some music that we enjoyed together,
He passed away in the middle of the case?
Yeah, he literally, I mean, this sounds really artsy craftsy. I think the fact that Dr. Dre threw him out after he started the thing, I think he really died of a broken heart. He just literally collapsed at the wheel of his car driving to my office. Just
Really?
boom.
Wow.
Of course, then the case got fucked up. But, the early days of hip hop are pretty interesting. You guys probably know this and maybe don't know this. Before Straight Outta Compton, these guys would make mixtapes and they would go to a shopping center, not shopping center. What do you call that? Where people come and buy things? What do you call
The
this?
mall.
Swap meets.
Okay.
And they go at the swap meets and they would sell these mixtapes and they would play this music. And that's how this whole thing got started in Compton, Interestingly enough, Dr. Dre, I guess the breakthrough album would have to be The Chronic, right? I think
Sure, yeah.
That's the first step. Well, the irony is, and again, going back to old shit, Diane Warren's studio in LA used to be owned by a guy called Dick Griffey. He and a guy called Don Cornelius started a TV show called Soul Train, okay? So they had this studio, and this guy, who never heard of him, Dr. Dre, can I get some free studio time? And the guy says, I will give you the free studio time, but I'll own 50% of your record. Guess what? That record was The Chronic, and that's how Death Row got started.
So nuts.
Isn't that crazy?
So you also had to argue against Suge Knight, which is extremely high profile case. And I mean, at any point in that process, did you feel, I don't know, did it make you nervous, or did you fear for your life, for lack of better terms?
Did it scare the shit out of me? Yes.
Yeah, I can imagine so.
It was just, he's just a pretty scary dude,
Yeah, I can't even imagine having to prepare for a case like that, and I would be intimidated to say the absolute very least, for sure.
I would be scared to see his name on a piece of paper that I had to.
I'll tell you one thing,
go
I'd be
against.
scared if he's coming to my front door. I'll tell you that.
Well, that's what did you ever fear that there would be some sort of retaliation or anything like that?
Not really. I mean, I felt that there was so much public glare on it that there's, I was almost there where the high profile nature of the case kind of protected me, because, I was getting calls all the time from people, and it was a big story here in LA where he ran over that guy with his car, and it's just an insane story. But it was pretty scary. It was scary.
Were you in the courtroom with him?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you ever make eye contact with
Absolutely
him?
not. I mean, let's see. Old bald Jewish guy versus a former football player here in Movie, 320 pounds. No, I don't think I will look at that guy.
Yeah, I'm good.
I don't think I would either. Yeah, I'm also good. Yeah, he's scary. He's still in jail, right?
Yeah.
Crazy, man. Give us your favorite Steely Dan story.
One more time?
Favorite Steely Dan story.
Oh, okay. This is hilarious. So Clive has just started Arista. He was, I'm sure you know, well, but you don't know this. He was once president of Columbia. He was fired for, quote, unauthorized expenditures, which meant he charged his kids bar mitzvah on his expense account. But there were other issues. With Clive. So Clive starts Arista Records, and he said, I would love to sign Steely Dan. They were available. So mind you, Steely Dan, the level of sophistication of their music. So we fly off to New York, and we go see Clive in his office. He says, I want to play you some of the new music we're going to put on Arista Records. So the first thing he played was Gil Scott-Heron. They thought that was cool, right? But then he made a big mistake. He played Mandy by Barry Manilow. The guys from Steely Dan just got up and walked out. That was horrible. And here I am. And meanwhile, Clive financed his trip of flying to New York. And he says, you're playing that shit for us? And he's got up and walked out.
Insane.
And what was that? What happened afterwards? Was that just the end of it?
Clive was a gentleman about it, and he and I are still, we still have a good friendship one together. But it was a very rough moment when you don't want to play Mandy to Steely Dan. Okay, that's a very bad idea. A very bad idea.
Crazy. So they were even bummed that the label that they were involved with was going to release that music. Is that what they just didn't want to be?
No, he was concerned. Becker and those two guys were concerned that their music would be on a label that would put out a record like that, which they think is so lame.
Got it.
I mean, those Steely Dan records, from a creative point of view, amazing. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Reeling in the Years is, there's still, still great stuff. Hey 19 and all those records are just genius records. And they just felt that their, quote, art was at a level above.
Yeah, it was above that.
They didn't want to be associated together.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That is.
So how long did you represent Clapton? And did you have any crazy experiences in that regard?
No, it was very, I have a funny experience. Clapton's manager was doesn't matter his name, not important, but he sequestered Clapton. And Mo Austin at Warner's was so excited about the possibility of signing Eric Clapton. Mo Austin, by the way, one of the greatest guys on the planet, the chairman of Warner's, and just think some of the great music that Warner's had, from who didn't they have, right? I mean, everything from Michael Franks, which is kind of artsy crafty, to Randy Newman, to Fleetwood Mac, to Prince. I mean, it had just a wonderful place. It was a wonderful place. The place, when we walk into the building, you could just feel how great it was to be there. It was really inspiring. So Mo was in Europe, and I arranged a meeting with the manager and Mo at a hotel. This was secretive because he's signed to Oliver in a hotel in London. Unfortunately, Mo is hard of hearing. They were playing violins real loud in the restaurant. So we couldn't hear what the deal was because the fucking violins were so loud. But the good news is we made the deal, and Clapton, then the next drama was when, of course, Clapton's child died, and
sure, yeah,
Tears in Heaven came. So
yeah,
I don't have a lot of personal. I just worked for him. He was very polite. I had one other connection. The song Layla on the Derek and the Dominoes records was written by another client of mine called Jim Gordon, who I don't know if you know who Jim Gordon was.
No, I'm not familiar.
Derek and the Dominoes, who after I got his royalties paid, he went ahead and with a hammer murdered his mother, murdered her to death with a hammer.
Jesus.
Holy shit.
Still in prison. Jim Gordon. Scary dude. He looked like a linebacker. He looked like a guy who played for the Ravens. He looked like 6'2", 210. I mean, he was a big dude. And you think he'd be happy getting 130,000 pounds, which in those days a pound was worth $4, getting all his royalties from Layla. But he went home. He came to my office that day, and I said, Jim, on my couch are all these English pounds. They're yours. He says, well, what about your cut? He said, well, Mickey, take what you want. I said, no, it doesn't work that way. So anyway, I said, you must be really happy today. He says, no, I'm not very happy. Now, most guys, you give them $500,000, he'd kind of be smile. He went
hell yeah, I'd be kissing you on the lips.
Yeah.
Shit, yeah.
He went home with a hammer, murdered his mother, literally beat her to death with a hammer.
That's horrible.
Christ.
Yeah.
Spent none of that money.
Yeah, in his pocket, So.
All right, speaking about money, let's go back to Fleetwood Mac for a second. Let's talk about the relationship between Fleetwood Mac and cocaine. How much money would you say they spent? Because it's no secret, right, that they had their drug issue, right? How much money over the years would you say they spent on cocaine? So
here's the reason I can't give you an answer. I made it very, very clear that I wanted nothing to do. My job is to bring the money in. I don't want to be on the pay side because if there would be a conflict of interest, I'd overdraw.
Sure.
So I would bill the accountant every month.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't, but is it lots of dollars? Yes. Lots.
As I would imagine was the case with most artists back in that time frame. I don't think that's exclusive to them.
Well, it's not exclusive to them. No.
Yeah, I would imagine.
It was all. Drugs back then were completely different than they are today, I think. So we do this thing where it's rapid fire questions. Chris is going to ask you a bunch of questions. You just answer them.
Yeah, just whatever pops into your mind first.
Yeah, we call them day sheet questions on the show.
Yeah, so this is our day sheet. We're just going to go over a couple quick questions. First one, what do you think is the greatest album of all time?
Wow.
I know that's a tough one. If someone asked me, I wouldn't be able to answer right away.
Well, I have to. If it isn't the greatest, it's one of them. Is a Rumors album. I think is something that's unbelievably brilliant.
Sure, absolutely. How about your favorite place you've ever visited?
Favorite place on the planet?
Yep.
Iguazu Falls, South America, where Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay come together. The most breathtaking place I've ever seen in my life.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
All right. If you had to pick one song to sing for karaoke, what's it going to be?
My voice is so bad that if I sing in the shower stops. Okay. So no one wants to hear me sing. But if I had a voice, which I don't, and I wasn't afraid to sing, which I am, my favorite song, the most beautiful love song ever written, is a song called A Song for You, written by written by, my mind just went blank. The recording of a song for you. It's one of the most beautiful love songs ever written. And my favorite rendition of it is, I'm trying to think of who the artist, Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway's version of A Song for You will put you in tears. It's that great. If someone said, if you could write a song and you could sing a song that expressed to you the love you have for a woman, what would that song be? It would be A Song for You. The last lyrics, he says, and when my life is over, when we were together, I'll be singing the song for you. The other magical song was Christine's song called Songbird. When the last line, she says, I wish you all the love in the world. Most of all, I wish it for myself. Pretty powerful stuff, huh?
And while we're on the topic of beautiful love songs for women, I'm curious, have you ever used your legal skills in an argument against a significant other to win an argument?
Against who?
In a significant other, wife, girlfriend, whoever, have you ever pulled out your legal skills to win an argument?
They win every time. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we're on the same page. True. So it happens to all of us.
That's
okay.
True.
My father said to me, number one, if you do 99 things right and one thing wrong, you only hear about the rest of your life the one thing you did wrong. Number one. number two, they don't fight fair. So I just get, just take the house, take the money. Just don't yell at me, please.
Sure. Okay. What is your favorite decade? For music or any of your life experience? What if you had to pick one decade to go back and live in again? What would it be?
70s.
The 70s. Okay. What is the weirdest legal question you've ever been asked?
In a defamation case, if it was possible to sue someone who had a bad opinion of you, even if it was factually correct. So a dilemma. I was empathetic to the person that had the claim, but realizing that there's no legal position to sustain it. That was pretty frustrating.
What is your favorite thing to snack on while you're reviewing a contract?
I'm kind of into nectarines, okay?
Okay, I respect that. That's a respectable answer. And then I'm going to do one more here. What is your Mount Rushmore of artists?
If I had to put who I'd put up there?
Yeah.
The one person of all of them?
Or I guess the four. You get four. Top four artists.
Well, I'd have to definitely put Mick Fleetwood there because he's such an awesome guy. I think I'd put Chick Corea there because he's such a scary, great musician. I think I'd put Stanley Clarke there, the bass player from RTF. And the last one I'd put people will probably want to say he's not deserving, but I think Lindsey is that great a guitar player. He's never in the top 10, but I think the stuff he did and does is just impeccable. So I put those four guys up there.
Pretty solid list in my opinion.
This could have gone on for hours and hours because we're sitting here talking to the Forrest Gump of music. So, we could have continued to ask and ask and ask and ask. If you had an opportunity to call your younger self and have a 5-minute conversation, what age would you want to talk to, and what would that message be?
Wow. Talk about a tough question. I think I'd like to speak to myself when I was in the mid-30s and the 70s, when I was in my mid-30s before I was 40. And I would tell myself, be more appreciative of what you're going through. Even though you're enjoying it, enjoy it even a higher level because things are going to happen in your life. People you are going to love are going to die. You're going to get sick and go to the hospital. You might get cancer, which I did, but I would just tell myself, when you're in the moments of joy, expand them to the maximum. Expand them to the maximum because I'm not a negative person. You know me, Josh, but I still have tears when I lost my life partner, Nancy, on August 13th, 2020. So I try not to think about that day. Ironically, I was taking the deposition of Lil Nas X while that was going on in another case. And just celebrate the fact that I had lovely parents and a lovely sister, and I had the ability to be around some gifted people, and don't let the bright light of that be darkened by the sadness, which is definitely going to come to all of us.
Well, on that note, Mickey, I just want to say a huge thank you for taking this time out of your day and sharing all this with us. This is the amount of, like I was saying earlier, the important moments in music history that you have had direct contact to, being able to speak to somebody who can speak to firsthand accounts of all these things is really crazy. And I genuinely appreciate you being willing to sit down and chat with us about all this stuff.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I wish you great success with your podcast series. And I mean it. Or if there's anything I can do to accelerate its success, it'd be my privilege, and I would enjoy it very much. And I've enjoyed this too because I've relived some of those moments. And as I said, I'm looking out my window as any fire. So anytime you can find comfort, and joy, and laughter, and it's really a blessing because these are difficult times right now.
Right. That's why I wanted to have you on, because it would give you the opportunity to go back and relive some of these moments.
Hey everyone, Chris here, and I just wanted to take a second to say thanks for watching today's episode. You can check out more episodes of Late for Load-In on the right side of your screen and find any applicable links to this episode in the description down below. There you'll also find a link to our Patreon, which is the most direct way to support the show, and it's only $1 a month. Please consider giving this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to follow us on all social platforms, @Late for Load-In, @Chris_TGI, @Josh Carell. See you guys next week.